Welcome back. Let's look at pairs of lines. So two lines can be related to each other in 4 different ways. We have intersecting lines, and we've already talked about that, so we're not going to be filling that in on our note template right now. And those are lines that intersect one another at a point. Two lines can only intersect each other once. If those lines intersect each other at right angles, we have perpendicular lines. So that one is in your notes. Under the word perpendicular lines, write in that they are 2 dimensions. Right? Intersecting lines, perpendicular lines, or a type of intersecting line, are in 2 dimensions, right? Because we're going in 2 different directions. Perpendicular lines, and so for your definition, you can write the underlined words there. Perpendicular lines are lines that intersect at right 90-degree angles. And then add when 2 perpendicular lines intersect, make sure you write in that we have 4 right angles that are created. So here we have lines AE. In this case, these are line segments, but we can make them lines. They can go on forever. Okay, so lines AE and EH are intersecting lines on the right rectangular prism. They are perpendicular to one another. Right, so in your notes for your diagram, we have here an example of perpendicular lines. Right? And so when we see that box, anytime you see the box, it means right angles. And not only do we have 1 right angle formed, we have 4 right angles formed. Right? So show that there are 4 right angles when we have perpendicular lines. We have a symbol for perpendicular, so we don't have to write that word out. There's a lot of letters there. Right? And it looks like an upside down T. Right? So it says naming symbol. I want you to write in the symbol for perpendicular lines, that upside down T. And this will go with our diagram here. Lines GH is perpendicular to line IJ. So instead of having to write all those words, we can say the same thing with some symbols. We like to save time in mathematics. Right? So line GH is perpendicular to IJ, and we can use the symbol for perpendicular. We have parallel lines. So parallel lines are, and so this is the definition. Oh, and by the way, these would be in 2 dimensions as well. They'd only be in 1 dimension if they were on top of one another, and then that would be the same line. Right? So you can write 2 dimensions. Those are parallel lines are lines that lie in the same plane that never meet. Right? So you have to include that they lie in the same plane, because we have other kinds of lines, right, that aren't in the same plane and that also never meet. But to be parallel, you have to be in the same plane. They remain an equal distance apart. Right? So here we have AE and DH. Right? And if we want them to continue on forever and ever, they'd be lines. If we want them to stop, they'd be line segments. Let's make them go on forever and ever. Our parallel lines on the right rectangular prism. Right? And we have a symbol for parallel when we want to show it on a diagram. Right? So those little arrows here, and actually let's put it next to diagram here. When we see that, that means those are parallel lines. Right, so A and E here and D and H we talked about are parallel lines on our rectangular prism. In your notes, I want you to write in the diagram that shows the 2 parallel lines. And we like to save time, so we're going to have a symbol for parallel lines. Right, so our symbol looks kind of like 2 lines that are trying to stay an equal distance away from one another. Best I can draw it. And underneath, you can show that those 2 lines are parallel by writing line LM is parallel to line NO. And that should go in the symbol naming part of your notes. The last kind of lines we have are skew lines. Those are in 3 dimensions. So like parallel lines, skew lines never touch. But unlike parallel lines, skew lines are not in the same plane. So for your definition, write in skew lines are lines that never meet because they lie in separate planes. So, and I can show you the diagram here I have. I'm going to show you in class in with a live object so you can actually see it, three-dimensional object as opposed to trying to look at it on a flat surface. But AE and DC here never intersect because they lie in two different planes. So line EA is on one side, line DC is in the front. They're going to pass each other, they're never going to touch. For your notes, you have a diagram here, right? And I want you to draw in the picture, right? So we show two skew lines, and that's trying to show it's a two-dimensional representation of something that's three-dimensional, but the line EF here is not on that plane, and so it is not going to intersect with line CD. And I don't know why I have this here right now, but we'll talk about that later. Right, so we've talked about the four different ways that lines can the four kinds of relationships lines can have: intersecting, parallel, perpendicular, and then skew lines. Those are our four different relationships. So if they intersect, they cross. If they cross at right angles, then they're going to be perpendicular lines. If they're in the same plane and never cross, they're parallel lines. If they're not in the same plane and never meet, they're skew lines. And that's the end of this podcast. Right, so answer the questions that follow, and I'll see you in the next podcast. Bye for now.